Steve Milloy is the E&E Legal Fellow and a former Trump-Pence EPA transition team member, and he joins us now. Hello, Steve. Good to talk to you again, sir.
Hey, Vince. Thanks for having me back.
When you hear the UN Secretary General say that we're responsible for the hot temperatures we're experiencing now, you say what?
Well, he's quite the windbag. Look, we've since 2014, almost 9 years now, there's been no global warming despite 500 billion tons of emissions. Now, we are told that every emission warms the planet, but over 9 years, 500 billion tons, no warming. It's summertime. Yeah, it's hot. It's hot in different places. And, desperate climate alarmists like Antonio Guterres, they want to use every, hot day as proof of global warming. It's just simply not true. The media has completely hyped all the heat waves in the United States. I mean, the fact is that June and July overall have been pretty cool in the United States. 75% of Americans living in cooler temperatures, only 25% in warmer temperatures. That's got nothing to do with emissions or climate change. But it's just called weather.
But I'm looking at headlines. I've got a mountain of headlines in front of me today that says July is the hottest month ever on record. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal at the beginning about, July 3rd, 4th is supposed to be the hottest days in 125,000 years. Of course, what the media didn't tell you is that, those claims were based on satellite data and computer models, neither of which we had 125,000 years ago. It was completely made up. The Biden administration ran away from, those hottest day claims. They live on in the media because the media's mission is to scare everybody into believing in climate change. And there's no science behind any of it.
Yeah, and yet it endures. I remember that, sometimes I've cited this a bunch, but sometimes a conservative will look at a very snowy day and say, boy, we could use some global warming right about now. And the reaction from the left is always to poo-poo that and say, well, weather isn't climate, they would say. The weather isn't climate. I've noticed they don't use that anymore on a hot day.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that likes to torque them about that because the narrative has been that emissions are just going to boil the planet and it's going to get hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and never stop. And of course, none of that has ever been true. June was the 35th anniversary of NASA scientist James Hansen's infamous testimony in the Senate, which launched what I call climate idiocy. And, every claim he made was wrong. He even claimed that 1988 was going to be the hottest year ever. It wasn't. There is no climate prediction, no prediction of apocalypse that has ever come true. I repeat that all the time because it's true, because these people will not go away with their, junk science.
And yet, again, they endure. I mean, here's Karine Jean Pierre saying this week that climate change is taking over our entire lives.
How do we move forward as climate change is taking over every part of our lives almost?
It's taking over every part of our lives. And I look around and I think, no, it's not climate change that's doing that. That's the government.
No, that's exactly right, Vince. The Biden administration has this all-of-government approach to climate. It's like their number one agenda issue on their agenda. And every agency, regardless of how remote they are from weather, is doing this. The Department of Defense, Department of Health and Human Services, every agency is pressing this climate agenda. You cannot get away from it. Every scientist in America is funded to do climate change, it seems like. And so it's hard to escape. The media is just fixated on this. And it's because the reason climate is their, most important item is that climate is the way that they plan to control all of us, that, they can get a grip on the economy, that they don't want us in cars anymore.
Yes.
So they're going to say that, oh, well, you guys should, you should drive EVs. Of course, no one can really afford EVs, and there's no charging network for it. And so what they're really doing is just taking us out of our cars. They're destroying the electricity grid. The Biden administration has proposed to get rid of all the coal plants, all the gas plants in the 2030s. At the same time, they want to burden the grid with all these EVs. Well, of course, that can't work. And you got to understand, well, why are they doing this? Are they really stupid? No, of course they're not stupid. They have the internet. They're smart people.
Yeah.
This is their plan. Their plan is to destroy our standard of living, to take away our freedoms, to destroy the economy, make people dependent on government. And there you go. That's the end game.
And the more that they can create confusion around this issue and say, look, it's just too complicated for you to understand, the more they can justify that they need to have all the power. I mean, there's an example of this, of course, was what we experienced during the COVID hysteria, as the government assumed all sorts of power unto itself, made all sorts of bold claims that all turned out to be false. And we lived through it. And I'm looking at, there's a piece of audio I have here of a World Economic Forum advisor by the name of Yuval Noah Harari, who suggested recently that COVID was a really useful exercise in the ways that they can now take over the planet, that is, government officials can take over the planet with regards to climate change. Take a listen to this audio.
It's not an extremely deadly virus. It's not the Black Death. And look what it's doing to the world. So now just try to think what will be the implications of a much bigger problem like climate change. Also, conceptually, it shows that, and here I completely agree with you, Rutger, that it shows you that you can change things on a massive scale. That, and again, you can stop all flights. You can lock down entire countries. You can actually do that, and life goes on in some way. And this, I would say, may make us more open to radical ideas about how to deal also with climate change.
Amazing. Just amazing.
Yeah.
And so he's saying exactly what you just laid out, which is that they're doing this for power.
Yeah, look, I'll just give you 2 data points real quick. At the beginning of COVID, when we did the lockdowns, as soon as they saw that was possible and people weren't going to push back, they started fantasizing, oh, well, we can go from the COVID lockdown into a climate lockdown.
Yes.
And then just a couple weeks ago, on the front page of the New York Times, on the front page above the fold, was a headline that read, "Extreme heat is the new COVID." And that's all you really need to know about the whole thing. It's just an excuse to lock us down.
And the irony of this, you mentioned that even the electric vehicles, they won't be supported, that we don't have the grid to support them. What that also means is that we wouldn't have the grid necessary to support common things already in use, like air conditioning. Air conditioning is the reason people survive hot summers. And there's a lot of death ahead if they get their way.
Well, yeah. So I was just listening to TV this morning, and I understand, there are a lot of grid systems that have issued warnings because of heat waves, and they can't supply electricity because over the last 10 years they've been dismantling our grids, replacing reliable wind and solar and nuclear with unreliable solar and wind, and it's making our grid unstable. Now we can't even provide electricity for sure. And then on top of this, there was a Los Angeles Times reporter had this big article last week about how, well, maybe blackouts are something we need to accept to solve the climate crisis. These people are completely nuts.
Yes. And there's another piece that I know you follow more closely than the rest of us do, which is that they'll often tell us about some specific thing happening on our planet that's irreversible. And then when it actually is reversed, meaning things improve, they don't give you the update. So, for instance, the decline of the polar bear was a big thing for a while. Polar bear populations are now flourishing. The Great Barrier Reef was disappearing. Now the Great Barrier Reef is growing back at record levels. And they never give us updates on the things that they were giving us doomsday forecasts about in the first place.
No, that's right. There never was a polar bear crisis. I mean, polar bears were hunted to near extinction by the 1960s, but since hunting restrictions, the polar bear population has bounced back. It's at its highest level, in a century. They're doing fine. Nothing they claim, none of the disasters they claim have happened or will happen have ever come true.
Right.
They're never held accountable for any of their wrong predictions. You're right. They just move on to the next. There's always bad weather someplace. So when when one of their claims falls through, well, there's new bad weather tomorrow, so they just jump on that, and it's just endless. And climate is a very politicized, polarizing issue. A lot of the media is now paid by left-wing foundations to promote this. The Associated Press, which used to be a wire service, just providing hard news. Well, now it is paid millions of dollars by the likes of the Rockefeller Foundation, left-wing foundation, to propagandize on climate. The Washington Post is paid by corporations. It's also paid by the Rockefeller Foundation to propagandize on climate. And they're not going to go away. You can't prove them wrong because they're just, they're always onto something new.
Right. And if we go back to the 70s, I think you and I have talked about it before, all the concerns, for instance, about human population growing out of control. That was all used as a predicate for just a massive genocide of humanity. We have lost so many people certainly to abortion, and as far as we can tell, dramatic declination in fertility around the planet. There is, and this is all at the hands of the very people who were scaremongering about population explosion.
Yeah, and I think population reduction really is their end game. Their end game is control, and it's a lot easier to control 2 billion people than 8 billion people. When you look at what they're doing, Paul Ehrlich got the population reduction gang going in the 1960s with his book, Population Bomb. And in that book, Paul Ehrlich claimed that the carrying capacity of the Earth was 1.5 billion to 2 billion people. Well, obviously that was wrong because we have 8 billion people living longer, healthier, wealthier lives than ever. But Paul Ehrlich is still out there, in his 90-something years, talking about how we can't have more than 1.5 to 2 billion people. And when you look at what the agenda is, taking away our energy, destroying our energy economy, producing less food, just in general, making us poorer, reducing our standard of living. All the stuff that took us from 1 billion people before industrialization to 8 billion now, they're taking all that away. I guess you can't build gas chambers anymore, but you can starve people. And I think that's what they plan to do.
So when your plan is anti-human and the dominant system around the planet for governance is democracy, how do those two work together? Because the people will not vote to destroy themselves.
Well, the people are not voting to destroy themselves, but of course, the left lies about everything it's doing. The whole climate agenda is a lie. The agenda is, we're going to make every day just like perfect weather. And of course, they're not doing anything of the sort. And a lot of people on the left, are on the population control agenda.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people in the middle that just don't know any better. And even I run into conservatives that don't really understand any of this. So it's really easy for them to get elected. Look at Joe Biden.
But in the end,
crazy agenda.
But in the end, though, my point is that simply that democracy will not prevail in the face of this. If the goal is fundamentally, once it's fully realized and fully exposed, they're going to have to go. They're already on the road to full tyranny. There's no way that you could get popular support for this type of anti-human destruction.
No, of course. That's absolutely. People would not vote for this. People need to be lied to, and that's what's going on.
It's pretty awful. Steve Milloy, thank you for tracking the details as always. Really appreciate your time today, sir.